The kingdom of Ghana is not wanting for ruins. All over the country, from Mauritania to Mali, you find ruins everywhere. For example, pictured here is the entrance, Gao. Gao has these amazing ruins which go underground as well as overground. These bricks are not the same as others that you would find in West Africa, even though they were very early. These bricks are fired bricks, unlike those you find in Janae. Unfortunately, Janae, which is a trade city with the Kingdom of Ghana, lost a lot of its ruins because they're made of mud brick. Gao was a very important part of the history of the Kingdom of Ghana. It served very well for these people. Wars would be fought in these areas. The consolidation of power also started around Gao. Up to Sigilamasa, we find artifacts that were manufactured in Gao. As we move away from Gao, we find other ruins all over the place. For example, in Ao the Ghost. Ao the Ghost boasts with many different civilizations covering a very large landscape. It is so big that some of the ruins have been removed from the outside. Now, a lot of these ruins located inside of West Africa have been built up again and lived in. Outer Ghost is one of those places, but some of the ruins have been left alone. What we see from the top view is that this place was fixed with a civilization or a location that was occupied for a very, very long time. In other words, there are ruins that go back from the 5th century, and then there are ruins inside from the 7th century, then the 13th century. These ruins located in Outer Ghost also talk or tell us of several different peoples. Who are these peoples? Well, we have the Sanhaja in there. We have the original Soninke people. And then we also have people who wrote about this place who were the Almoravids. These people who would expand from this area and then make it all the way to Spain were very powerful indeed. And why wouldn't they be? Now, people like to talk about the ruins of these places, and Outer Ghost is no exception. But I also like to show gates because that is a very important thing that happens within civilizations. For example, if we take the Swahili coast, this is not the Swahili coast, this is Outer Ghost in West Africa, in the Kingdom of Ghana. If you take West Africa, you have a place called Manikene, which was lived, but it was really a gate of trade, and it means the place of giving. And in Outer Ghost, you have also a road or a ruins that lead to roads to other places which they did not have power over. Just like in Gao, Gao had a lot of openings that led, like, so it points you to a direction, like, okay, go that side and you can trade with Jene, go that side and you can trade with the capital, go that side and you can trade with these people. Now Outer Ghost and Gao, as you can see, are very far apart, but they belong to the same empire. This empire boasted 10 major cities. 10. This does not happen often. And remember that since it's from the 6th century onwards, this place was basically non-Muslim for a long time. In fact, it's thought that they converted to Islam at about the 11th or 10th century. When they convert to Islam, you start getting books. And some of these books, they start to make claims about Arabs who founded some of these places in order to give legitimacy to the Islamic reality. But luckily today we still have some foundational creators of these kingdoms. Now you might think, oh yeah, those are two great cities and they have great ruins, but that's just two. Well, let's look at another one. Located in between Gao and O the Ghost is another ancient site. This site is not Timbuktu, as Timbuktu had a different name and was not built up yet. This location is Walata. Walata, although this might have not been its actual name at the time, is another area filled with ruins. But before we go there, we shall stay in Oda Ghost. And as you can see, Oda Ghost is much closer to Walata than it is to Gao. Now, notice how the setup of these ruins are. You see the generalized area of the city. Then you see on the outskirts these plans or these top view area around. And right at the edge, you see there's a little square on the outside. That is a gate town or a gate area, a gate plan. It's more of a street than a town. As you can see, this desert is very, very occupied. Now, again, it's very difficult to imagine, but the camel, even though it was brought around West Africa in the first century, was not mostly used in these areas. It was still horses. And so traveling from place to place was fairly difficult in the desert. These places were actually, to some degree, fertile in some areas, which was easy to occupy. It's actually thought that one of the reasons why this civilization fell, one of them, is the fact that they overfarmed some areas or they let their animals overgraze in some areas. But we do know that from a specific time on, they had camels, and traveling between these places would be slower but more productive, being able to carry very large things over a long time, changing the entire culture of these people once and for all, while the other cities would serve as a great powerhouse for moving around into Spain and other places. These places, like Walata, would serve as a great internal trade, boasting libraries and things like that from the Islamic world, speaking Arabic and writing in both Arabic and their own languages. You would find here al-Bakri writing about what the people in this specific region look like, something we'll look at another time. But what is more important, since we're looking at ruins, is UNESCO. UNESCO talks about exactly what these cities were used for and how they were used from the 11th century. Now remember, these sites were occupied prior to the 11th century. They had some buildings prior to then, but again, because of rebuild, these places changed dramatically over the years. So we see ancient Xar of Wadan, Chinguetti, Tichet, and Walata in Mauritania. This is the Great Four cities, which would be used for travel by Muslims using the camel. Now, we do know that the camel by the 11th century had been introduced and it started being used over and over again. And we even find from the 13th century European or the 16th century European writers that would write about people coming as far from Mauritania down to the Swahili coast. But as we read from UNESCO, these four ancient towns, founded in the 11th and 12th century on the southern limits of the Sahel-Saharan desert, were originally built to serve the vital caravan trade route across the Sahara. There are outstanding examples of medieval towns with architectural ensembles illustrating 7 centuries of human history and bearing testimony to the intensity of changes linked with the important west to east and north south trans Saharan trade. Between the 12th and 16th centuries, the town became obligatory stages for the caravan routes linking North Africa and the river regions of Western Africa and the entire Savannah zone. As a result, these trading and religious centers became the home of Islamic culture, which radiated an intense religious and cultural life. Today, they are the last surviving evidence of an original and traditional mode of occupying space, representing the nomadic culture and long distance trade in the desert environment. The medieval towns retained a specific urban morphology with narrow and winding lanes, houses built around central courtyards, and original decorative stone architecture. As a result, they present a remarkably well-preserved urban fabric and houses with patios densely packed into narrow streets around the mosque with a small minaret. They also illustrate outstanding examples of the adaptation of urban life to the extreme climatic conditions of the desert, both regarding the construction methods, the occupation of space, and agricultural practices. Al-Masudi lived at a time when Islam had not penetrated as far as West Africa. In fact, he gives us an account of how the Muslims moved as far as North Africa, which was occupied, some parts of Morocco were occupied by Idris bin Idris in a place that today is still called the Black Palace. But from this Black Palace going down, he calls this the Black Lands. So, in other words, from the Western Sahara all the way down, that entire area is dominated by what he calls Sudan. As we read, the country of Sudan borders on the most distant plains of the dominions of Idris bin Abdullah bin Al Hassan bin Il Hussein bin Ali bin Abi Talib in the Maghreb, which is the country of Talisman, Tahart, and Fez. Then comes Sus el Adna, which is about 2,300 miles from El Karwan and 20 days from Sus el Aqsa. The cultivation extends without interruption as far as Wadi al Ramel, Valley of the Sand, and Qasr al Aswad, the Black Palace. Further on comes the Desert of Sand, in which one finds a town of the name Medinet en Nawaz, Kabib Erasas, the town of copper, and Copolis of lead. Musa bin Nasser has penetrated as far as Medinet and Nawaz under the reign of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, the leader of Syria. The wonderful things which he has seen are related in several books which are known to everyone. Some are of opinion that the town which has been stormed by Musa is in the plains of Ard el Kebara, the mainland, which extends north of the peninsula of Spain. Maimun bin Abd el Wahhab bin Abd er Rahman bin Rostam el Farisi, who was of the Ibadian sect. He further goes on to explain the lands under the desert. It can't be helped to imagine or to think that these lands that he is describing is this civilization, as we read. But before we read, let's first talk about the connection. So there's an area called the Maghreb, and the Maghreb is from Libya all the way to Mauritania. Now, this Maghreb will be mentioned, and not only will he mention it, but he will connect its long trade with East Africa. So now we read, in these places of the Maghreb are found some of the sects of Khawarij called the Harurians. They possess several cities like the town of Dara, which has large silver mines. This town lies towards El Jasser and is contiguous with the country of the Abyssinians, with whom the inhabitants are at constant war. In our book called The Akbar Examen, we have related the wars of the Maghreb, and we have described the town of that country. We have named the sect of Khawarij and Ibadian Sophrians and the Mozarite sects who live there, and we have related the wars which rose between the followers of those two religious opinions. We have also acquainted the readers with the history of El Aglab et Tamimi, who was appointed by the Mansur over the Maghreb, of his residence in Africa, of the state of his affairs during the reign of Rashid, and the succession of his son as an independent prince over Africa and other provinces of the Maghreb till Abu Nasir Zadatul La ibn Abdul bin Ibrahim bin Ahmed el Aglab bin Ibrahim bin Muhammad. One of the early mentions of Sudan as a center for learning is when mentioning Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Kanimi, who came from the Kanem Bornu Empire. He was obviously a jet black man because he came from Bornu, and this empire, which was contemporary to the empire located here, which we will talk about the Kanem Bornu in the Middle Ages and before in another video. But if we read the second paragraph, we can see that Ibn Humayya, which I can confirm this, but let's first read what it says. Ibrahim was born in Oasis Bilma, then a part of Kanim. In a poem, he refers to himself as belonging to the Dakwan branch of the Banu Sulaim. The Dakwan moved from Upper Egypt to North Africa in the 11th century. He's described as jet black in hue, indicating that his mother, at least, was sub-Saharan African. He was educated in Sudan, in Ghana. Now, this Ghana is important. He wasn't educated in the country of Ghana today, as it didn't exist then. He was educated in the kingdom of Ghana. So this is one of the earliest references that we have that it was a center for learning, and Ibrahim is not seen as a small entity in the world. Now, the reason why I bring this up is so that I can show you that when they say that the people, the Abyssinians, are contiguous with this civilization, to them, Sudan, so the entire Sudan region, is from, and I can easily read this in Al Masudi's book, is from the Zanj areas all the way till you get to the Maghreb in Mauritania. And this is why they mentioned this. Now we know that there were tons of silver mines all over the kingdom of Ghana. We also know that there was a salt mine which they visited in the Fezzan region or the Fez region of Morocco, where they went and picked salt in that region. We know this because Ibn Battuta mentions it later in his book that this is a historical site where they would go and fetch salt. Now, there are four currencies that existed in the kingdom of Ghana. There were four currencies in the kingdom of Ghana. The first one is obviously gold, but gold was not even as valued as other metals in the region. In fact, there is some tell that three gold would be worth one bronze in some situations. The second one, okay, so there's four of them. It's salt, gold, bronze, cowrie shells, and what else? Textiles there, clothing as well. That's five, not four, but yeah, gold and copper I put under metals. So it's metals, cowrie shells, textiles, and salt. Those were used for the most part as currency in trade. Now, obviously, Ghana, the kingdom, is different than Ghana, the country, but they did have some contact. When mentioning the Sudan regions, Ibn Hawkal, a historian from Arabia, mentions the furthest reaches of the world. So he mentions Spain, Europe, and all of those places. And then he comes down to the Maghreb and further south in the land that he calls Sudan. And he mentions several places, including the Kanem people. He actually names them, called Kanemu in his book. And he says this about these people: between Yajuga and Majuga and the Northern Ocean, and between the deserts of the blacks and other limits of the ocean, all is desolate and waste, without any buildings. I know not what are the roads or stages of those two deserts which are on the coast of the ocean, because it is impossible to travel in them on account of the excessive heat which hinders the building of houses or residing there. Thus also in the south no animal can exist, so excessive is the heat, nor any person dwell there. Now, before I read the next part, by the way, Ibn Halkal exists around the 10th century. But now, before I continue to read, if we look right at the top, so look right at the top, if you look down, there's a place called Sigil Masa. This place has always been in contact with the Ghana Empire, as we will read. But I want you to notice exactly where Sigil Masa is, which is in the Maghreb, in the area of Morocco. So just know that before I continue to read this. Sigil Masa is a town of middling size belonging to the territories of Tahuth. One cannot enter Sigil Mash but by the way of the desert, which the sand renders difficult. This town is situated near the gold mines, between them and the land of the blacks, and the land of Zillah. These mines are said to be of the most pure and excellent gold, but it is difficult to work them, and the way to them is dangerous and troublesome. They say the district of Tahuth is reckoned as belonging to Africa. Zilla is a town of middling size, with many territories belonging to it. It is situated near the country of the blacks. This land of the blacks is very extensive region, but extremely dry. In the mountains of it are to be found all the fruits which the Mohammedan world produces, but they do not eat them. They have other fruits and natural productions for their food. Their skins are of finer and deeper blackness than that of any other blacks, whether Habish, Abyssinian, or Zingian Ethiopians, and their country is more extensive than that of any other nation of blacks. It is situated on the coast of the ocean to the south, and to the north they have deserts which extend towards the deserts of Egypt from behind. So before we go back to the ruins, let's talk about the fact about what's happening there. Firstly, he mentions that the people located in that side of West Africa, from Sigil Masa down, are some of the blackest people you will ever meet in color. Their skins are way darker than any of the other people, and they say finer than the other people in the areas. As you can see, just like Al Masudi, he says that this place extends from the bottom through the Maghreb all the way down to East Africa, which is continuous. Now they're mixing two empires and calling them all Sudan, which is the Kanem Bornu region, so the Kanemu regions, and they're mixing them with the Kingdom of Ghana as one long, extensive thing. In this next paragraph, he connects Andalus and West Africa of the Maghreb together and notices that there is a back and forth of slavery between the Europe and Africa. So as we read, Maghreb, the West, or Africa, is chiefly remarkable for the black slaves. It is the land of the blacks. The white slaves come from the quarter of Andalus, Spain, and damsel of the great value, such as are sold for 1,000 dinars or more, and mules fit for the saddle, and coarse woolen stuff, called nemed meghrebi, and coral and ambergris, and gold and honey and silk and seal skins. As you can see, these kingdoms are very connected from the Maghrebi, which includes Mauritania, which would be part of the Kingdom of Ghana, all the way till you get to the Kanem regions and you get to Egypt. But again, this is not about the extensiveness of those places. Let's go back to the ruins. Excavated in the 1900s, these are the historical remains of a city that fell in the 1300s called Tedawust. This area is still intact in some way, intact ruins in some ways, as you can see in some images. It's actually next to two towns which also have ruins of their own. These ruins are a couple hundred meters and they're pretty large and show pure living or pure understanding of these people. Teda Woost, to some degree, shows easy places for quarry brick breaking. Now, remember, there was two things that are very different about this particular region as compared to a lot of other regions in Africa. So let's get into the ruins a little bit. So the difference between this is a lot of times in Africa, when you find civilizations, they go up these things here and fetch bricks and then put them together into a formation. So, however the brick comes, that's just how the brick comes. The difference between the Kingdom of Ghana is that they baked bricks. So, in other words, the bricks were of good size, equal size, because they were not just taking nature. So, whatever nature gives you in some kingdoms, you just take that and you run with it, or you break it down like they did in Great Zimbabwe, where they can get blocks that are the same size, but this is through chiseling and getting rid of some parts of it. Here, they're taking clay, burning it, and creating bricks, and then they're basically putting them together. And as you can see, they're not just sitting together in dry stone walls. They are literally together and they're not moving. Now, this is probably why this place, West Africa, this place of West Africa boasts so many ruins that are still intact today as compared to other places. One of them, Janae Jano, which Janae, even though it was one of the most respected cities, I mean, they have the giant mosque over there. Even though they have that, they have a problem that they were building with mud, and sometimes they would build with brick, but it was put together with mud, and so the brick and mud would die together, which is not very useful historically, even though we can still find the mounds or the leftover foundations and stuff like that. I, to some degree, have to say that based on the writings, which is why I made sure to put the writings in between here, based on the writings, can tell there's a reason why they say this land is the most extensive civilization compared to all other African territories. Now, as impressive as Teg Daoust, and Ao de Ghost, and all the others are, they are not the capital of these regions. The capital of this region boasts giant buildings, libraries. It has everything that you would need, giant walls, and some of them are still very much intact today and used. In fact, in that area, the books are still stored in some of those areas, which that's another point of this, is that they have a lot of books from that region. They would later be controlled by Sundiata Keita, but for now, they were the control, the dominating part of the world in this side of the world. And not only are they there, like I showed you in some of them, there and Ibn Hawkal and Al, the guy who made the maps, I forgot his name, they're not the only two people who mentioned them moving back and forth between Spain and Africa, and also a lot of, conversions of Islam. I mean, something that I didn't put in a big way is the fact that Islam was still not dominant in this region. Before we look at the capital of Ghana, we shall look at the writings from al-Bakri, who was located in Al-Andalus, who gives us extensive history of who these people were exactly. So he says in the customs of the people of Ghana. By the way, the book that he's writing in, he writes customs of all kinds of people, including those in India and all over the world. He says, the name of the previous king was Basi. He led a praiseworthy life on account of the love of justice and his friendship for the Muslims. At the end of his life, he became blind, but he concealed this from his subjects and pretended that he could not see. When something was put before him, he said, this is good or this is bad. His ministers deceived the people by telling the king what he had to say in cryptic language so that the commoners could not understand. Basi was a maternal uncle of Tankhamen. This is their custom and their usage. The kingdom is inherited only by son of the king's sister, matriarchal. He has no doubt that his successor is a son of his sister, while he is not certain that his son is in fact his own, and he does not rely on the genuineness of this relationship. This Tankhaminen is powerful, rules an enormous kingdom, and possesses great authority. The city of Ghana consists of two towns lying in a plain. One of these towns is inhabited by Muslims. It is large and possesses 12 mosques, in one of which the people assemble for the Friday prayer. There are imams, masons, and assistants, as well as jurists and learned men. Around the town are wells and sweet water from which they drink, and near which they grow vegetables. The town in which the king lives is 6 miles from the Muslim one and bears the name Al-Gaba. The land between the two towns is covered with houses. The houses of the inhabitants are made of stone and acacia wood. The king has a palace and a number of dome-shaped dwellings, the whole surrounded by an enclosure like the defensive wall of a city. In the town where the king lives, and not far from the hall where he holds his court of justice, is a mosque where pray the Muslims who come on visiting diplomatic missions. So these are the people coming from north or anywhere else. Around the sorcerers of these people, the men in charge of the religious cult in these are idols and the tombs of their kings. These woods are guarded and no unauthorized person can enter them, so that it is not known what is within them. In them also are the prisons of the king, and if anyone is imprisoned there, no more is ever heard of him. The king's interpreters, his treasurers, and the majority of his ministers are Muslims. Of the people who follow the king's religion, only he and his heir presumptive, who is the son of his sister, may wear sewn clothes. All other people wear clothes of cotton, silk, or brocades, according to their needs. All men shave their heads, shave their beards, and women shave their heads. The king adorns himself like a woman, wearing necklaces and bracelets. He doesn't wear like a woman, by the way. They consider this feminine in Al Andalus, where he comes from. And when he sits before the people, he puts on a high cap decorated with gold and wrapped in turbans of fine cotton. The court of appeal is held in a domed pavilion around which stand 10 horses with gold embroidered trappings. Behind the king stand 10 pages holding shields and swords decorated with gold, and on his right are the sons of subordinate kings of his country, all wearing splendid garments, and with their hair mixed with gold. The governor of the city sits on the ground before the king, and around him are the ministers seated likewise. At the door of the pavilion are dogs of excellent pedigree, which guarding the king hardly ever leave the palace where he is. Round their necks they wear collars of gold and silver, studded with a number of balls and of the same metals. The audience is announced by the beating of a drum, which they call daba, made from a long hollow log. When the people who profess the same religion as the king approach him, they fall on their knees and sprinkle their heads with the dust, for this is their way of showing him their respect. Now, I want to remind you that this is the exact quote as in the Kingdom of Congo when the guy mentioned that these people are so into the religion of the idols that when they pray, they throw themselves into the dust. You still see this, by the way, in some of the Caribbean islands as well. They throw themselves into the dust and toss the sand over their head, or water in some cases, for this is their way of showing him their respect. As for the Muslims, they greet him only by clapping their hands. So you see a difference there. The religion of the people of Ghana is paganism and the worship of idols. When their king dies, they build over the place where his tomb will be an enormous dome of sage wood. Now, this is the reason why I showed you these buildings that were built by these people that were built based on Tumalai, because you can see here they're still doing the same exact thing. So we read again, the religion of these people of Ghana is paganism and the worship of idols. When their king dies, they build over the place where his tomb will be an enormous dome of sage wood. Then they bring him on a bed covering with a few carpets and cushions and put him inside the dome. At his side, they place his ornaments, his weapons, and the vessels from which he used to eat and drink, filled with various kinds of food and beverages. They also place there the men who have served his meals. They close the door of the dome and cover it with mats and materials, and then they assemble the people who heap earth upon it until it becomes a large mound. Then they dig a ditch around the mound so that it can be reached only at one place. They sacrifice victims of the dead and make offerings of intoxicating drinks. For every donkey loaded with salt that enters the country, the king takes a duty of 1 golden dinar and 2 dinars from every one that leaves. From a load of copper, the duty due to the king is 5 mithqals, and from a load of merchandise, 10 mythgals. The best gold found in this land comes from the town of Giaru, which is 18 days traveling from the city of the king over a country inhabited by a tribe of Negroes, their dwelling places being contiguous. The nuggets found in all the mines of the country are reserved for the king, only gold dust being left for the people. Without this precaution, the people would accumulate gold until it had lost its value. The nuggets may be of any weight from an ounce to a pound. It is said that the king owns a nugget as large as a big stone. The town of Giaro is 12 miles from the Nile or Niger River and contains many Muslims. The countryside of Ghana is unhealthy and not populous, and it is almost impossible to avoid falling ill there. At the season when their crops are growing, the mortality among strangers is the highest. At the time of the harvest, when the king of Ghana calls up his army, he can put 200,000 men in the field, more than 40,000 of whom are bowmen. The horses in Ghana are very small. The route al-Bakri would have taken to get to Kumbi Salah, which is where he ended up, is through Wadan. Now, Wadan is very, very popular as Wadan has some of the greatest leftover ruins, and ruins in the true sense, in that almost no one lives in that area at all. So let's look at these ruins. So these are the ruins of Wadan, and famously, as written in the writings, it is bordered. So in other words, you can tell that it's a bordered area, and it shows the difference between civilization and the end of civilization, the creeping desert in that region, although it wasn't always exactly a desert, it was very livable. Because of the desertification, of course, a lot of these ruins have been saved in this region. Now, I'm going to continue to show buildings of Wadan, but I want to talk about Al Bakri so you can visually check them out. So you would think Al Bakri would not make it all the way down to Kumbi Salah, because why would he go down there? It's so far away from the top, and already there's something so fascinating at the top. But this is what gives him so much power. This is why almost everyone who mentions the Kingdom of Ghana, they only mention Al Bakri as a source, because the source that is him, Al Bakri, is so detailed. It has so much information that all the others just fly to the side and they feel almost like grabbing clouds, like there is nothing there. You can see here how big it is. And remember, this is an empire in the true sense. This is an empire in the true sense. It's not one city or two cities and it lasted maybe 3, 4, 5 days. Instead, we're talking about a civilization that lasted a long time, very long time. It grew with the other cities that grew at the time. And in fact, I promise that without this specific civilization, you don't get Mali, the Kingdom of Mali. You don't get the other ones that come afterwards that become these great civilizations. Now, obviously, it's not the only civilization in West Africa. There's still the Kanem regions, which we'll talk in another video and show their ruins. But in this one specifically, you can tell that it's growing in a very fast way. Wars were fought, and illusions were brought here, and people from here were sent to Andalus. The Almoravids came from here, and so many other people who would venture forward. We even have signatures, which I can't find for some reason, in Arabia, where some people from this kingdom would go and sign. And remember, after this, we would still have people like the Mansas and people like that who would come showing the history of these places. Now, something that al-Bakri mentions, and this will tell you how early he came to this place, is that they're not all Muslim. Only a few of them are. A lot of them are idol worshippers, which is good. It tells us that this civilization was not dominated by Arabs of any kind, black or white. Instead, it was brought up from a pure African standpoint, and the people of the religion, if you wanted to portray this place in a movie or something, a song, whatever, it would have to have majority people who believe in traditional African mythology. And of course, at the time, they called them idols and heathens and stuff like that. Luckily, luckily, they wrote that down and did not do what some of the other writers did, because some of the other writers called the Zanj atheists, which is inaccurate. Now you will notice this structure here, which by the way, when you see it, you'll think we've already seen that picture. It's not the same. As you can see here, this one's on the border. And when we look at Kumbis Allah, you'll think we're looking at the other places that I've already mentioned, but these structures are there. Notice how these ones, this giant structure right in the middle, notice how it doesn't have anything atop it. In Chingiti, this is different. Chingiti is another part of this ruined city, and it has mosques of great size. We can also look at the capital in Kumbisalah and look at how big this civilization was more and more and more. But I think I've made my point about how great and extensive this civilization was. Let's go to books for 1 second. So if we look at the city of Kumbisalah, what we see is giant roads, giant city, and inside you would find books located. Firstly, everyone had books. Like everybody had a book in at least one of the houses. One of maybe five houses had books. But then after that, you would have the great library, which some of the books are still preserved today. And obviously, there were books built after that, after the kingdoms that came after the kingdom of Ghana. That's something to remember, by the way, that a lot of these ruins, Wadan is probably the best one because a lot of it is still based on what was there and abandoned at the time. But some of them are mixed with newer civilizations. With the fusion of the Berbers who came down, Arab Berbers who came down and fused with the black Africans who lived inside the Ghana Empire, soon you will see people who look like him all over the place who are a mix of a civilization. Like I said, remember when I said Berbers consider themselves the same as every other African? They are distant from Arabs in their opinion. They don't even like being conflated with Arabs. But of course, they have Arab DNA and they have Roman DNA as well. But what we are talking about here is the libraries. And as you can see here, he is guarding a library. And inside this library are some of the deepest archives in Africa, talking about books of, firstly, most of them are about Islam and are about the Prophet Muhammad and about the change in this region, the histories. And there are books that have already been translated, a story for another day. And there are some which have not been translated and it would take forever to translate myself. This video took a long time to create, and of course, this empire took a long time to create. But thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, donate, whatever else you can do. Watch it again. I don't know. Share it with your friends. And make sure we have a good understanding of what happened. Now, I know some people were very patient, and thank you for that, when I kept showing you ruins of steel and all of that stuff. But I needed to put that foundation inside before I go to the medieval empires, because if I don't, then it will be obvious easy for people to put in a knife in the information and say, no, 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 these are Berbers who invented the civilization, which is why I showed you some of the writings, which showed that just off of Morocco, when some of the Muslims from the east took over in the name of Idris bin Idris, who took over, we can see that in Morocco, they mention that that region is all black. And from the east and west side, they mention they're all black. And Zilla, which is probably Silla, another ruin in Mauritania. By the way, there's a less famous civilization located in Senegal, which I'll talk about another time. But thank you for watching.